شہر مدینہ تو رو دیے عابد کا دل غموں سے بھرایا تو رو دیے پاؤں میں آب لیتے چلے اور ٹہر گئے روضہ رسول کا نظر آیا تو رو دیے پہنچے قریب شہر بیٹھے زمین پسر کو جھکائے ہوئے امام سایہ کیا کسی نے ردا کا تو رو دیے پہنچے قریب شہر عباس کی وفا کا شجاعت کا ذکر تھا بیٹے نے آ کے باپ کو پوچھا تو رو دیے پہنچے قریب شہر بنی کو بیٹے کا پرسا دیا مگر صغرا کو دے سکے نہ دلاسا تو رو دیے پہنچے قریب شہر مدینہ تو رو دیے عابد کا دل غموں سے بھرایا تو رو دیے صلوات صلی اللہ
please recite one more Fatiha for the Shuhada. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وفوضوا أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير. والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري وأحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الدين عند الله الإسلام. صدق الله العلي العظيم. زينوا مجالسكم بالصلوات على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Iman, Salamun alaykum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The question is, what are we building towards? What are we working towards? Keep that question in the back of your mind. Year after year, age after age, generation after generation, century after century, we have been blessed with the opportunity to gather ourselves, our parents perhaps, our grandparents perhaps, have been endowed with the opportunity to commemorate the Majlis of Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam. And this is amongst one of the highest honors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to have the tawfiq to attend the Majlis of Imam Al-Hussein alayhi salam. A Majlis which is revolutionary in its very essence. A revolution that not only is external but internal. A revolution of the heart, a revolution of the mind, a revolution of life. And when we look at history and we look at our day today, our age today, this revolution is something that is very powerful for our community, and yet at the same time is something a cause of fear many a times for those not within these walls. The fear is that for perhaps this love of the Ahlebait, the wilayah of the Imams alayhimus salam, of the Ahlebait themselves, is so powerful that it has the ability to topple empires and regimes. The power of the Ahlul Bayt is such that they can change the political climate. In fact, they can change the scope of history. And more on that in a moment, inshallah. But the question that lies before you and I is the question that I will get to right away. And that question is, what are we building towards? What are we working towards? In life, if you look at the life of somebody growing up here, or in any part of the world for that matter, a young person, a boy or a girl, their parents want the best for them. For example, they themselves want to aspire to be the best in their life. So for example, somebody wants to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer. They chart down this path. And when they chart down this path, when somebody comes to ask them, what are you doing with your life in high school or in college? What are you doing? Many times the first response is, I am studying. Studying for what? I'm studying to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer or an economist or a journalist or a pharmacist or a psychologist and you go down the line. And that becomes part of that individual's identity. The quintessential question of the 21st century and the 20th century was, according to philosophers, what do you do? And based on the response of this question, what do you do, we assessed every aspect of someone's life. So for example, if you're a doctor, we said, okay, this person is good at medicine, they're giving back to society. At the same time, we help them in esteem in every aspect of their life. But if somebody said, for example, maybe they were saying that they were studying something else, or for example, maybe they weren't studying, or maybe they were starting out on their own journey, and they said, I'm not sure yet, then we would begin to assess that person's life based on that criteria. Further than this, if somebody had a job or something that they did in their professional life that society did not put a big value on, then we would degrade and demote that person in every aspect of life. This, by the way, was not the concept of Islam. Islam said that there is no difference, and this is much of the part of what caused opposition to Rasulullah in the beginning. When Rasulullah came forward, Rasulullah was first saying, La ilaha illallah. First proclaimed that there is no God except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What did the opposition say? They said to Abu Talib, the uncle of Rasulullah, who was his protector, they said, Abu Talib, we don't have any problem with what your nephew is saying. If he wants another God, we'll add another God. We have already 300 plus gods in the Kaaba over there. He wants one more, no problem, we'll add another one. We'll add 10 if you want, no problem. But tell him to stop saying this saying that there is no God except God. That means that we have to remove all the other gods that are there in the Kaaba. We don't want to do this. The other thing Rasulullah did was he ended tribalism. Arabia that was rampant with tribalism, Rasulullah comes in that environment and he says that no Arab is better than a non-Arab. This was unprecedented, because I mentioned this many times. The Arabs, if you want to talk about the miracle of the Quran al-Majid wa Furqan al-Hamid, every major prophet came with a miracle. Musa alayhi salam came with a miracle. Isa alayhi salam came with a miracle. The miracle of Musa alayhi salam was the staff that he had, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had the ability to give him, that he would change that in front of the magicians in the court of Fir'aun. Those magicians were doing optical illusions. You ask the question, why miracles? What are miracles? Those quote-unquote magicians, what do magicians use? They use deception in order to trick the mind. So many times if you see somebody who's a magician, even in today's era and today's time, I know many of our youth watch these things, maybe somebody who's showing that they're floating or levitating, for example. And you see behind the scenes, what is the illusion that they are playing, for example? That they may be lifting their toes in such a way and they have the camera at such an angle that you think that they're actually floating, but in reality they're not. Or for example, they'll play a trick with cards or something of this nature. So those people who are in the court, the magicians of Fir'aun, they had, for example, before them, they had strings or ropes, and some people were saying they were using mercury in order to give people the illusion that these were moving. And therefore, when Musa alayhi salam comes forward and puts his staff, his stick if you will, in easy language, he puts it before them, and that stick or that staff becomes into a serpent which eats the others. According to the Quran, all of those magicians fell into prostration. فَعُلْقِيَ السَّحَرَةُ سَجَّدًا, that they all fell into prostration because they knew right away that this is not something that is an optical illusion. This is reality. This is haqiqah. This is the truth. They said our limit does not go beyond this. We cannot do this. They understood that. The miracle of Musa alayhi salam. We went forward, you saw the miracle of Isa alayhi salam, medicine. In an era where people were intrigued by medicine, Isa alayhi salam, Prophet Jesus, peace be upon him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the ability to bring the dead back to life. This ability that was given was something that even the top physicians of that era said that this is beyond our scope, beyond our ability. This is something that is a divine attribute. The miracle of Rasulullah, our Holy Prophet himself, was the miracle of the Quran al-Majid wa Furqan al-Hamid. This book, but many people who, many times youth ask, and elders even ask, many people ask, that why is it that a book, a linguistic miracle, really, is that it? And the reality is you have to read the history and understand the context. The Arabs in the Jahiliyyah era, the area of ignorance prior to Rasulullah, they had such arrogance and such pride on the Quran, on their Arabic language, that when they saw the verses of the Quran, they realized that this is something that is not from this world. They had divided the world into Arab and Ajam. Do you know how much pride they had in their language? Arab means what? Those Arabic speaking languages. And they had divided anybody who's not from Arabic speaking language is Ajam. Ajam means mute. Somebody who cannot speak. That is, either you speak Arabic or you're mute. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His divine hikmah, in His infinite wisdom, said that I will respond to them in the thing that they are most prideful of. And that is their language. They say there was a poet by the name of Sha'sha, who was a very big poet, who would not even speak. He was someone who lived in the era of Jahiliyyah, Ayam Jahiliyyah, before the announcement of Prophet of Rasulullah in Arabia. On the Kaaba, they would have what they call the SAWW mu'allaqat. These were these poetries of the highest caliber that they regarded. That these were verses of poetry that nobody could compete with. There was a poet by the name of Sha'sha. Sha'sha was a person who would only come out of his house once a year. And that was for his poetry. And in fact, he was a person who they say he would not go and speak to people who were from the village, for example. He never left his area. He never left his city. He would never go to the village. Why? What was his logic? They say the reason for his logic was that a poet, their skill is their language. And they didn't want any words to come into their vocabulary that was less than their esteem. So therefore they would try to have the highest level of language. Therefore they would try not to speak with these people. I've asked and I've researched. By the way, Mir Anis used to do the same thing. Many years ago, he would not talk to people of the villager kind. That's what they say. Because he wanted to keep a certain level of language in his poetry. This was very common amongst poets throughout the centuries. In any event, Sha'sha, he said, I don't speak to anyone. I only write my poetry. You want to converse with me? Read my poetry. They say they took the verses of the Quran and they put them on the Kaaba. When they had been revealed, Sha'sha comes to the Kaaba. When he comes to the Kaaba, he begins to read. And he begins to read what's already there. Some of the poetry of the Arabs. He reads it. He understands it. Moves on. Then a point comes in time where he begins to read the verses of the Quran. He doesn't know that they are the verses of the Quran at that point. When he finishes reading the verses of the Quran, he says, "Ma hada kalamul bashar." These are not the words of a human being. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knew that the Arabs, they said that their highest level of intellect was poetry and linguistics and adab, grammar, and Arabic language. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala proved to them through the Quran al-Majid and Furqan al-Hamid the miracle that is the Quran. Brothers and sisters, as followers of the Ahlebait in the 21st century, we must make our connection with the Quran as strong as possible. A book of guidance. This book is such a book that can help you and I in every aspect of our lives. If we develop a relationship with it, if we begin to converse with it, if we begin to dialogue with it, you will benefit from it, inshallah. The point that we're driving at is, however, what is it that we are working towards? And the answer to this I want to give myself and us together is especially after, as the days of the mourning of Imam Al-Hussein A.S. draw to a conclusion. By the way, the days of Imam Al-Hussein A.S. truly never draw to a conclusion. The barakah of Imam Al-Hussein A.S. is that we are permitted to do a majlis of Imam Al-Hussein A.S. at any point in time. As long as, for example, it doesn't contradict with a wiladat of the Ahlebait or some type of this event or date. But for example, Shabeh Jum'ah, Thursday night is an optimal opportunity for us to remember Imam Al-Hussein A.S. And many of our scholars would do this. This was their practice. But in any event, what are we building towards? Someone is building towards becoming a doctor. That person is judged by that throughout their lives. Someone is trying to become an engineer. So if you want to be a doctor, for example, they say 4 years here, 4 years undergrad, 4 years graduate school, then after that 3 years fellowship, and then maybe after that, then you get on your journey. That's the journey, for example, right? Engineering, so you would have those, whatever you have to do for that. You have all these different fields. Somebody wants to be an economist, maybe they want to go down and do a PhD. But I'm inviting you, and I'm inviting myself, to understand that for us as followers of the Ahlebait alayhimus salam, our journey is much greater than this. Our journey is not simply to just get a degree and a paycheck and to just leave this world. No. We have a much bigger obligation. And I want to invite yourself and myself to say and give this foundation that what you and I are building towards, what our life is, what we are working towards, is towards the reappearance of Imam al-Hujjah, Sahib al-Asri wal-Zaman. This is what I want to discuss with you in the brief moments that we have together. I want to start by saying, what is the connection between Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and Imam Hujjah alayhi salam? Is there a connection between these two ma'sumin? And what is this connection, if there is a connection? What was the relationship of our scholars in this era and in previous generations with respect to the Imam of our time? And how can we learn lessons from that to implement in our own lives today? Because if we say that we have an Imam that is hazir, that is present, but he is in ghaiba, but he's still present, then that Imam must have benefit for us. And indeed the Imam has tremendous benefit for us. And we'll discuss that. And we will discuss what is the relationship between Imam al-Hujjah and the tragedy of Karbala, and how Imam Sahib al-Asr wal-Zaman remembers the tragedy of his grandfather, inshallah. This is our discussion tonight, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Particularly as the Ayam Aza, the days of mourning, draw to a conclusion, it's very important for us to realize that this is not the end, rather this is in fact the beginning. Many times when people graduate either high school or they graduate from university, mashallah, now they even have kindergarten graduations. It's good. We should encourage educational graduations at all times. It's an achievement. But when you go to a university, either your bachelor's graduation or master's graduation or your PhD or doctorate graduation, it's called, the ceremony is called a commencement ceremony. And when asked why is it called a commencement ceremony, the argument that comes forward is that it is the commencement of one phase of your life, but the beginning of another. That the real work actually begins from here. Your work is not done. You've become a doctor, you've gotten your degree, it's not over. Now your work starts. This is why, for example, they have the Hippocratic Oath, for example. When you become a doctor, you say, you pledge allegiance to this oath, that you will take care of people at every moment in time. An engineer, same notion. Lawyer, whatever it may be, your work once you get the degree is not over, it begins. Analogously, in a similar way, when we come to the days and nights of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, as those 40 nights or as those 2 months and 8 days draw to a conclusion, that does not mean that our job is done. In fact, our job is just beginning. Our work is just starting, and that is to keep that fire that is in our hearts alive throughout those days and nights. Rasulullah says, "Inna liqatlil Husayn hararatun fi qulubil mu'minin, la tabrud abada." Verily, for the tragedy of Husayn alayhi salam in the hearts of the mu'mineen, there is a fire, a flame that burns. And he says, "La tabrud abada," which never extinguishes. The question we must ask ourselves is, how much do we keep that flame burning? Rasulullah says it will not extinguish. But what happens is, as the year goes on, that flame that is huge, it begins to shrink and shrink. But it doesn't go out. It stays lit. Our job is to keep that flame going as strong as possible. What is the connection between Imam al-Hujjah, our 12th Imam, and Imam Hussein alayhi salam? Let me give you some examples. On the 15th of Sha'ban, the birth of Imam al-Hujjah, when we commemorate, there are many particular things that we are recommended to do. For example, we are highly recommended to recite the ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein on the day of Imam Zaman. Why? Ya Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is the birth of my 12th Imam. Why are you telling me to recite the ziyarah of the 3rd Imam? Further than this, one of the most esteemed days to go for the ziyarah to Karbala is 15th Shaban, the birth of Imam al-Hujjah. Ya Rasulullah, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ya Imam al-Hussein, Ya Ahlebait al-Nabuwa, Ya Allah, it is the birth of the 12th Imam. You're telling me to go for the ziyarah of Sayyid al-Shuhada? Why? Signals, indications that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us time and time again to remember, never forget this relationship. Never forget this connection between the Imam Sayyid al-Shuhada and Sahib al-Asr, the Imam of our time. Very important. Sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Because the reality is the culmination that when our 12th Imam reappears, at that moment in time, his message is directly tied to the mission of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. And the Imam himself reminds us, either in Zarat al-Nahya or in many other moments, that he remembers and he cries for his grandfather, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. He says, my grandfather, I cry day and night for you. And when my tears end, I cry tears of blood for you. Allahu Akbar. Drawing our attention continuously throughout to remember the position of the Imam, both Imams. But the culmination of the Imamat of our 12th Imam is connected directly to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. First very important point. We have from a very, very authentic tradition from Shaykh al-Saduq. Shaykh al-Saduq, one of our most honorable scholars throughout Shia scholarship, that he says on riwayah, on narration from Imam Sajjad, that one who dies in the era of Imam Sahib al-Asr, the 12th Imam of his grandson, the Imam says, during the era of the Imam Mahdi, with wilayah of Imam Sahib al-Asr Zaman in his heart, will die with the merit and the honor of 1,000 shuhada of Badr and Uhud. Allahu Akbar. You will die if you have the wilayah and the belief and the love and the ma'rifah of the 12th Imam. If you die in that state, during the occultation, during the ghaibat, in that state you will get the sawab, the ajr of 1,000 martyrs of Badr and Uhud. Some of the first shuhada of Islam. Wow, how? The Ahlebait further extrapolate on this, and please pay attention here. Because the job is very difficult. It's not easy. They say, the Ahlebait have told us, do you know how difficult it will be to keep your iman during the age of ghaiba and occultation? It's not like they get a free pass, that those people who live in that era and that time will automatically get the thawab and the ajr of 1,000 shuhada in Badr and Uhud. The Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam say, and this comes from the tradition of Rasulullah, where he says very clearly, Man mata walam ya'rif imama zamanihi, mata mitatan jahiliya. The one who dies without ma'rifah of the Imam of his era and time, dies a death of ignorance, of jahiliyyah. The scholars say that jahiliyyah refers to ayyam jahiliyyah, the era before Rasulullah. That is the type of death that one will die. But you know what's the problem with that death? It's as if you're dying the death of ayyam jahiliyyah after Islam has come. That's the problem. Someone may say, but if before Islam, ayyam jahiliyyah was there, maybe they didn't get the message, maybe they didn't hear about Islam. But no, the Ahlebait say, it's as if Islam has come forward and you rejected it. The same way, for example, Abu Lahab rejected it, or someone like this. The enemies of Rasulullah, when they rejected it, it would be like that death, to die without the ma'rifah of the Imam. We're told that somebody will leave their house in the morning with iman in their heart, with iman and belief of the Ahlul Bayt in the morning in their heart. When they come back at night, there will be no iman in their heart. We're told that as the ghaiba closes, comes to an end, and the Imam's reappearance in Zuhur comes closer, we're told that it will be such an environment that you will be sifted and sifted and sifted again. What do I mean sifted? You know, I'm sure many of you understand some of the history of the United States. Or perhaps if you look at, for example, the football. Many of these things are in our society, in our world. We don't realize them. They have a historical significance, but people don't realize it. For example, in sports, you have basketball, you have the Philadelphia 76ers. Very famous sports team that many of our youth will know. 76ers referring to whom? Referring to the initial phases of America in 1776. Analogously, you had in history, particularly on the West Coast, you have a team called the San Francisco 49ers. A team that many times, many people don't know the history. There was a gold rush in 1849, where that moved people from the east towards the west. Everyone was looking for gold. So many people began to inhabit the west. Because early adoption in the United States and people who moved were on the northeast block, the northeast of America. How did people end in the west? There was a gold rush. They said we can find gold. So what did they do? So they went there and they started to go into the rivers. If you know how you get gold, especially in the older times, you would go, for example, into a river and you would take something to sift out mud through the gold. And you would shake it. And when you would shake it, the mud would come out and sometimes there would be nothing in there. You'd throw it out again. Then you'd come back again and then you'd sift. Sometimes in this process, you would see something that glitters. Sometimes in this process, you would see something that shines. And you would say, hold on, it's surrounded by dirt, it's surrounded by mud, but I see something glittering. And then you would take that out and you would begin to wash it and you would realize that this was a piece of gold. And in this process, many people became rich. The Ahlebait alayhimus salam gave us the same example. Towards the end of the times and as the ghaibah of the Imam ends and as his zuhur reappears, time for his zuhur comes, you will be sifted and sifted again and again to the point that people will lose their iman. Only a few with gold in their hearts will remain. Our job is to be that gold that the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam talked about. Were they talking about that in a material sense? No. They were talking about that from the standpoint of iman and belief in one's life. And I tell you, if you develop this connection from the Imam and you pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and do the tawassul of the Imam, miracles will happen in your life. Allow me to explain. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. You go today to the Gulf or the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Gulf, you find a country by the name of Iran. How did Iran become a predominantly monolithic Shia country? How did that happen? This system that exists there, that is there, the system, many of scholars have argued, that system that exists today cannot be replicated in other countries. Why? Because you have a predominant monolithic environment where you have 98% Shias, and you have a minority of other groups. For example, Iraq is not the same. Iraq, for example, you have 60% Shia population, for example. And then you also have Sunnis, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah there as well. You also have, for example, Kurds there as well. You have Christians there as well. You have Jews there as well, many of whom have left, but there's still some remnants. You go to a place, for example, like Pakistan, you'll find a majority Ahl Sunnah. You'll find a minority of Shias, roughly 15 to 20%. You'll find also some Christians there, as you're hearing in the news these days as well. You'll find all these different ethnicities. You go to Lebanon, for example. In Lebanon, it's an interesting environment. You have officially a third Christian, a third Sunni, a third Shia. However, by the way, they have not conducted a census in Lebanon since roughly 1930. And the reason for that is they don't want to topple the balance of power. If they do the census today and they do the statistics, it may be that one group is more than the other. So what happens is typically in Lebanon you have the president or the prime minister or the chief of staff. Each one of those top three positions is held by one member of those three communities. So for example, one member, if someone's Shia, they will be in the president, for example. If someone's Ahl Sunnah, they'll, for example, be prime minister. Someone who is Christian, for example, they'll be chief of staff, for example. And this is the balance. But now today, Iran, you have an environment in a society, and Afghanistan, for example, Afghanistan is a country predominantly Ahlul Sunnah. But if you remember my previous lectures, it was not always like this. 100 years ago, there was a man by the name of Abdul Rahman Khan, the Iron Amir they called him, who did a systematic genocide against Shias. And he eradicated the Shia population in Afghanistan roughly 100 years ago. But unfortunately, this is the reality of the matter. Iran, however, is predominantly Shia monolithic society majority by far and away. How did this happen? If you go back roughly 500 years, there was a dynasty that exists there, the Safavid dynasty. Before that, if you go back further in history, Iran, after Islam came to the Arab Peninsula, Rasulullah announced prophethood in Mecca, and then it spread to Medina, then it began to spread throughout Iraq and Yemen and the Arabian Peninsula. Iran, at that time, the land of Persia, was still not Muslim until they say, the history says that the second Caliph Umar, he did the conquest on Persia. When he did the conquest on Persia, he turned them all into Muslims. At that point, they were not Shia, they were Ahlul Sunnah predominantly throughout the histories. And many people still have animosity towards that second Khalifa till this day because of much of the oppression that he did. For example, what did he do? There was a very beautiful rug. Now, the Persians were known for their art. They really, really emphasized this tremendously. They had a beautiful rug, a Persian carpet. Till this day, Persia is known for its carpets. That when you looked at it from one angle, it had one color. When you looked at it from another angle, it had another color. Depending on the angle at which you looked at the carpet or the rug, it had a different angle and a different color. And this is something that was the pride and joy of them. We're told the second Khalifa goes and conquers, of course, according to other Muslims, not according to us, the second Khalifa. Anyways, he said that, okay, we have conquered, now we have all this property. One of the properties is this beautiful carpet. It's so amazing, depending on the angle that you look at it, it has a different color. What do we do with this? Sometimes, if someone has animosity towards Amir al-Mu'mineen, sometimes the logic doesn't even work. Allahu Akbar. He said, okay, what shall we do with this? It came to the Khalifa, what should we do? Typically, when it was a matter of significance, and they really didn't know the answer, they would go to Ali ibn Abi Talib, and he would solve the problem for them. But sometimes they would make their own decisions. And sometimes when they would make their own decisions, they would make terrible decisions. What decision did he make? He said that, okay, this is such a beautiful carpet, I want everyone to have a piece of this property. He said, cut it up into pieces and distribute it. The reason throughout history many of them still have animosities because of things like this happening throughout history. Many youth ask, and many youth are asked in university, that Islam was spread through the sword. Islam was a barbaric religion, God forbid. And the reality of the matter is when Rasulullah, we look at the Islam of Rasulullah and Amir al-Mu'mineen, besides the leadership and the governance of Rasulullah, and besides the governance of Amir al-Mu'mineen Imam Ali alayhi salam, that era of 4 years and 9 months that Amir al-Mu'mineen ruled, and the era of Rasulullah, and the era where Imam al-Hujjah, Sahib al-Asr will rule, the world has never seen proper governance of Islam. It won't happen after that. There's only these 3 examples. 2 have happened, 1's going to happen. That's it. For every other scenario and every other circumstance, there's been oppression. So we need to be mindful of this. So for a very long period, Persia was not a Shia group. What happened? The Safavid Empire, in particular Shah Abbas Safavi, he turned this entire region of Persia into a Shia predominant society, in which his main chief justice, or Qadi al-Qadhad, who was an Islamic leader, was Allama Majlisi. Allama Majlisi being Sahib Bihar al-Anwar. Bihar al-Anwar, which we are told is written in 110 volumes. By the way, as a side note, there are more than 110 volumes. I confirmed this from Qom. There are about 9 other volumes that don't get published. Why? Because Allama Majlisi was very blunt about his views on the first 3 Khulafa. They don't allow that to be published. That's a side note, a footnote. In any event, the reality of the matter is this is what happened. But I want to share with you the connection of the Imam. This was in Persia. In Persia, this was going on. Across the way in Najaf lived a great man by the name of Muqaddas Ardabili. Muqaddas Ardebili was one of our great Maraja who lived in that time, roughly 500 years ago, who was a great scholar. Shah Abbas Safavi, who was the leader of the Safavid dynasty, who was leading this revolution that was happening there, he said that he wrote a letter to Muqaddas Ardebili, who was a grand marja of that time, and he invited him to Najaf, from Najaf to Iran. When he invited him, at that moment Shah Abbas wrote the letter, and this is a very, someone of immense strength and power, writes a letter to this scholar. At that moment, every time he would write a letter, we're told Muqaddas Ardebili, the grand scholar, would write back, declining. He would not accept. He said, I can't accept this position. For example, because if he had left, the Hawza of Najaf would be in a very difficult position. By the way, many of our scholars have done this. I say this so we understand what is the sacrifice that some of our scholars have given for Islam before we criticize them. Criticize. Ask questions, no problem, if you want. But with akhlaq, with etiquette, with morals, many times people come forward and say, where's this khums money going? It's a question that everywhere people ask. You are entitled to accountability, no problem. If you have questions, ask. But do not go further and say that I think that this is being usurped, God forbid. I've told you many a times, and I tell this everywhere I go, I myself, and many of you may have seen the projects that the Maraja are doing. For example, within the responsibilities of the Marja'iyya and the Maraja is to look after the poor, the orphans, and the fuqara, the poor of society, the poor, the orphans, and the widows. The aitam, the orphans, they also are responsible for the fuqara, the poor. So therefore, in Iraq, they build hospitals, for example. They build, for example, orphanages. All of this work, they're working towards building. We must be very mindful of this. I want to mention this because not very long ago, in our lifetimes, many of our elders' lifetimes, during Saddam's Ba'athist regime, during that era and that time, we have one of our grand marja in Najaf, we have 4 of them. We have, for example, Sheikh Ishaq Fayyad, who is from Afghani descent, from Hazara community, for example. We have Sheikh Hafiz Bashir al-Najafi, who, for example, is at that time, when he was born in 1942, there was no India or Pakistan. But if he was born today, it would have been Punjab, for example, Pakistan. In any event, then you go further, Sayyid Sistani, may Allah protect him, and you have, who by the way is a Persian himself, and you speak to him, when you see him, he'll speak to you in Farsi, predominantly his mother tongue. And then you have somebody who's named Sayyid Sa'id al-Hakim, who's from the al-Hakim family, from the family of Ayatollah Muhsin al-Hakim, who during the 1970s was the A'lam Marja. A'lam meaning most learned, there was a consensus that he was the Grand Marja. In the 1970s and 1980s, in particular the 80s, when Saddam came into power, many of the scholars, because he had weakened the Hawza, and what he had did was he had put spies into the Hawza and he was infiltrating the Hawza, many of the scholars left. They went towards Qom. When they went towards Qom, Sayyid Sa'id came to a point in time where he was somebody who said that I cannot leave Najaf because if I leave Najaf, this Hawza will collapse. But that was easy to say, hard to do. Why? Because they imprisoned him. Not only did they imprison him, they imprisoned his entire family. For 8 years, an innocent man and his family were in prison. And they ultimately were taken from prison to prison up to the point that they were taken to Abu Ghraib prison. You know how they would teach in that environment? They would teach. He said that we have been in this prison, we are not going to stop our studies. He said, bring me some books. Bring me the Quran. Bring me some of our books. Usul al-Kafi. Man la yahdharu al-faqih. Tahzeeb, istibsar. They said, Sayyidina, they said, Ayatullah, there are no of the books. None of these books are here present. They said they only had one Quran that had been worn and torn. That's all they had. He said, very well. He took that Quran and he began to teach them in the prisons. A prison where there are all ages here, I won't go into the details, the torture that they faced. Electrocutions, beatings, lashes. I can't go into details, very graphic difficulties that they went through. Why? This was their sacrifice for Shi'ism, for Islam, to ensure that this message reaches you and I. You know, by the way, I was told by the family that his references were so on point that after they went back and they checked, they found that his majority of his references were spot on, with the exception of 1 or 2, which were a page or 2 off. But I digress. Muqaddas Ardabili lived in such an era and such a time. His sacrifice was such. I want to give you one example. He used to be given gifts by people who were wealthy, for example. They would give him a cloth that was very, very expensive. And when they would give him this cloth, he would tie an amama with it, or a turban on his head with it. And on his way back home, he would see a piece, he would cut it, and he would give it. He would cut it and give it to every poor person that he saw, in order that they may sell it and get some money for themselves. This is the level that he was at. At that moment in time, we say he cut a piece, he would share it, cut a piece, give it to the point that when he got home, there was nothing left for himself. This Muqaddas Ardabili has a conversation and a discussion. Shah Abbas SAWW invites him, he says no. Up until a moment in time comes that Shah Abbas and Muqaddas Ardabili, they see a similarity that they can help each other with. What happened? There was a fugitive, a person who had allegedly committed a crime in Iran, and he had fled Iran to come towards Najaf. When he came to Najaf, Muqaddas Ardabili, who was in Najaf, said, Sheikh Muqaddas Ardabili, can you please help me? He says, what's going on? He said, I'm a fugitive. I've left Iran. They have alleged that I've committed a crime. And I'm somebody who I have fled for fear of my life. Can you help me? Can you intercede on my behalf? Can you talk to the regime? He hears this plea. He notices he hears the man's whole situation. And he writes a letter to Shah Abbas SAWW. Muqaddas Ardabili writes the letter. He writes the letter gets to Shah Abbas. Shah Abbas reads the letter, it says that I have with me a man who has left and is a fugitive from Iran. He has come to Najaf. If you forgive him, if you pardon him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take this pardon and reduce your sins. Allahu Akbar. Look at the language. A scholar is telling the ruler of a tremendous empire that if you forgive him, Allah will forgive your sins. Allah will reduce your sins. Another scholar or another ruler would say, what sins do I have? What have I done wrong? Who are you to tell me that Allah will forgive my sins? At the end, he wrote, Muqaddas Ardabili signed the document by saying, from the slave of the master of wilaya, from the slave of Ali ibn Abi Talib, Muqaddas Ardabili. He sent that letter. When he sent that letter, Shah Abbas got it, read the letter, and he wrote a letter back to Muqaddas Ardabili. And he wrote to him, he says, I have received your letter, and I have sought to it that the man is pardoned and forgiven. He says, signed from the dog of the grave of Ali ibn Abi Talib, Shah Abbas SAWW. By the way, some may say that this is unjust or improper, if I can say the concept of pardoning. To this day, you have something called presidential pardons that happen in the United States. One has become a joke and a mockery, which is on Thanksgiving, which is the presidential pardoning of turkeys. I'm not making this up, by the way. But further than this, in all honesty, as you notice, the presidential term of a president in the United States is coming towards an end. The president has been endowed with the power to pardon criminals. And many times in the last few months of the term of a president, at the end of the 4 years or at the end of the 8 years, you will notice that people begin to plead to the president to say that, can you pardon us? And sometimes they take that on board, sometimes they don't. You'll remember this at the end of the Obama era, the Clinton era, many other eras. A side note. This was the relationship Muqaddas Ardabili. But I want to tell you how important the connection with the Imam of our time is through the nature of Muqaddas Ardabili. If I just tell you who's Muqaddas, if I begin the story and I tell you the narration, you won't realize who Muqaddas is. Muqaddas was someone who had so much mindfulness and cognition of the Imam of his time that they said he never used to stretch out his legs. When he was sitting in a gathering, he would never extend his legs out. He would always keep them folded in. He would always sit in such a way. They said, Muqaddas Ardabili, there's nobody here. Why are you stretching your legs out? He says, I am not stretching my legs out, and I'm sitting in this way because I am afraid maybe the Imam of my time is sitting in front of me and I extend my feet towards him. That's the level of mindfulness and cognition that he had. Always remembering the Imam. How did this happen? We're told Muqaddas Ardbili, one day he had the ability, he would go to the haram of Amir al-Mu'mineen in Najaf. By the way, Muqaddas Ardbili is buried in the shrine, in the haram of Amir al-Mu'mineen till this day. When you go for ziyarah, inshallah, see that there. He's someone who would go in the middle of the night and he would have a conversation with the Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen. Now, by the way, don't be astonished by this. You know, sometimes we live in the world, the tangible world, the realm of the material. Till this day, many of our scholars, don't be surprised if they're given guidance by Amir al-Mu'mineen. I can give you numerous scholars, and I have given you in past. In any event, Muqaddas Ardbili goes towards the shrine. When he goes towards the shrine, he goes to the shrine of Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is narrated by his student, the student of Muqaddas Ardbili. He says, one night, in the middle of the night, I saw my teacher, Muqaddas Ardbili, going towards the haram of Amir al-Mu'mineen. When he's going towards the haram of Amir al-Mu'mineen, I followed him. He said, when I followed him towards the haram, I noticed that he was going towards the shrine. And when he was going towards the shrine, I noticed that the gates of the shrine, but the shrine that had been closed, the gates of that shrine opened for him by themselves. He entered into the shrine of Amir al-Mu'mineen. When he entered into the shrine, I noticed from a distance, the student says, that there was a conversation taking place. When that conversation was taking place, I noticed after a few moments, my teacher, Muqaddas Ardbili, turned around and he began to leave the haram and the shrine of Amir al-Mu'mineen. When he began to leave the shrine and the haram of Amir al-Mu'mineen, I thought that maybe he's going back home. Maybe he's going to his house. But I continued to follow him. When I continued to follow him, the student says, I noticed that my teacher began to go towards the outskirts of the town. When he began to go towards the outskirts of the town, he said he began to leave the town. When he began to leave the town, he said he got to a place in an environment where the student says, I saw my teacher having a second conversation, another conversation. When he had this other conversation, he turned around and he began to go back towards the city, began to go back to his house. Muqaddas Ardbili began to go back to his home. When he began to go back to his home, at that moment, sometimes, you know, you get the feeling that someone's following you. You get the feeling that someone's watching you. They say Muqaddas Ardbili heard the noise perhaps that his student was making, or he heard something that gave him the indication that someone's following him. He looked behind, said, Salamu alaikum, wa alaikum assalam. Who is there? What's going on? He says, Salamu alaikum, I'm your student. He recognized him. Muqaddas Ardbili recognized him. He says, what are you doing here? He says, I thought I would share on your journey. I thought I would join you on your journey. Muqaddas Ardbili says, for how long have you been following me? For how long have you been with me tonight? He says, since the beginning. He says, since when? Since the haram of Amir al-Mu'mineen. He says, the haram of Amir al-Mu'mineen? He says, from there you followed me all the way here and back? He said, yes. He says, really? The student says, can you please explain to me what happened? Can you please explain to me what occurred? He says, I will tell you, but I assure you and I take guarantee from you that you do not tell anyone about this, especially while I am alive in this world. He says, very well. Because it was a student, he trusted him. Therefore, he said, don't tell anyone while I am alive. He said, what happened? He said, the reality of the matter is every night I come to the grave and the shrine of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali alayhi salam, and I ask him to help solve my problems, my issues. The responsibility of maraja, of grand scholars, is very high. And many times they don't have responses. For example, we are told there are traditions from Alam al-Hilli and other scholars of where and how they've gotten help from Imam Sahib al-Zaman when they were not able to make a decree and a decision. I'll discuss that another night, inshallah, at another time. But rest assured, many of our scholars are helped by the Imam alayhi salam himself. Muqaddas Ardbili says that I will tell you that I come to get my problems solved through Amir al-Mu'mineen. And I come night after night, and every night Amir al-Mu'mineen, whenever I come here to ask for a solution, Amir al-Mu'mineen comes and helps and gives me a solution through the zarih, through the grave. He said, tonight was different. He said, what happened? The student asked. He said, tonight I went to Amir al-Mu'mineen and I asked him the questions. I began to ask him the questions that I have with respect to fiqh and jurisprudence and the question that I have. But Amir al-Mu'mineen was different today. He said, what happened? He said, Muqaddas, he says, according to him, the Imam said, Muqaddas, you always ask me every single time the solution to your problem, and I give you the solution to your problem. But Muqaddas, don't you know there is an Imam of your time? Why don't you talk to him? There is an Imam of your time and your era. Yes, fine, I answer your problems, no problem. Not an issue. But there is an Imam of your time. Have you ever addressed him? Have you ever spoken with him? Have you ever decreed or cried out to him? Muqaddas Ardebili said that I became very concerned and worried that I had not been thinking like this. He said, Ya Amir al-Mu'mineen, where is he? Where can I get him? Where can I converse with him? He says, Amir al-Mu'mineen told me where Imam al-Hujjah is currently. And at that moment he says, go to this place and meet my son and ask him your questions and you will receive the response. Muqaddas Ardebili says, I left the shrine of Amir al-Mu'mineen. When I left the shrine of Amir al-Mu'mineen, I proceeded towards the maqam that Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen told me. I met the Imam and I had a conversation with him. When I had a conversation with him, he helped alleviate the problems that I was having and gave me the solution to the problems. He says that this has been the journey that I have been on, from the haram of Amir al-Mu'mineen to here and back. He says, but I tell you, while I am here, do not let anyone know of this. What are we driving at? What's the point that we're getting at? That Muqaddas Ardebili who received help and assistance from Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen as well as Imam Sahib al-Asri wal Zaman, you and I have the ability to receive that help. If we work on our ma'rifah and our taqwa. Rasulullah said what? Rasulullah, when he changed Arabia, how did he do it? He did it by ending tribalism first and foremost. We're coming first full circle from where we started. Rasulullah said that there is no Arab who is better than a non-Arab, and no non-Arab better than an Arab, except in one thing, taqwa. That's the distinguishing factor. God consciousness, piety, that's all that really matters to distinguish people. This is why Rasulullah, when he said, Salman minna Ahlul Bayt, Salman is from the Ahlul Bayt, and he changed it from Salman al-Farisi to Salman al-Muhammadi. The Arabians of Jahiliyyah said, you're going to make someone like Salman, who's from Ajam, who's mute, like us? Rasulullah said, yes. That's what people had a difficulty with. He changed the whole paradigm. So Salman became Minna Ahlul Bayt. By the way, if anyone asks you ever about the position of Salman, you can use this reference. Muhyiddin ibn Arabi, the Spaniard scholar who's considered a big leader of Arfan or Sufism, for example, who's not considered to be a Shia, by the way. He says in a very interesting line that Rasulullah saying, Salman minna Ahlul Bayt. By the way, Ibn Arabi is someone that Ayatollah Khomeini studied extensively. Some have made him a controversial individual. That all aside, I'm giving you one thing. If someone says that do you understand the position of these people? Give them this response. Muhyiddin ibn Arabi, who is a Spaniard and is considered one of the leaders of mysticism and Irfan, he says, Rasulullah saying this one line and this one statement, Salman minna Ahlul Bayt. Salman is from the Ahlul Bayt. Put Salman on the level of Isma. Allahu Akbar. On the level of being ma'soom. You tell me that I raise Ali ibn Abi Talib too high? First give me a response for Salman. Then I'll talk to you about Ali ibn Abi Talib. Salawatullah wa salamu alayhi sallallahu Muhammad wa Muhammad. That was his view in any event. And if you look at many Sufi orders, many times I mention this because many people ask about Islamic spirituality. Where is the spirituality? Many people are dying for this in our era and our times. And in the next few nights, inshallah, I will explain to you why we need religion now more than any other time. Please, in the next few nights, if you can tell others to attend, I am trying to give a very, very comprehensive answer to a problem that many people face today, particularly our younger generation. And that question is, why do you need religion today? Why do I need religion? What's the point? Religion had some benefit up to 1,000 years ago, maybe. I don't need it anymore. This is the narrative that is arising. And I want to give an answer to that. But many of these Sufi orders, they go back, every single one of them, except for one, goes back to the first Sufi, according to them, Ali ibn Abi Talib, number one. Number two, Salman. And there's one order that says it does not go back to Ali ibn Abi Talib, the Naqshbandi order of that, there are three orders. Two of them go back to Ali ibn Abi Talib, one of them doesn't. What I'm saying is, these personalities, Amir al-Mu'minin and Salman, and Abu Dhar, and Miqdad, these were personalities for you and I to understand, or try to understand. And that's where ma'rifah comes from. And when ma'rifah comes, therefore thereafter comes that spirituality as part and parcel of it. Why time and time again, many of our elders grew up in an environment where they would hear only, for example, the fadail of Ali ibn Abi Talib and the Ahlebait. And why is this so important? What was the philosophy behind it? Never ever think this is a waste of time. I say this because the concept was that when you hear the fadail and the merits of Ali ibn Abi Talib, you begin to get an admiration of that personality. You begin to get closer to that personality. You begin to adopt a love of that personality. And a direct consequence of admiration is that one begins to try to live their life like that personality. That was the concept. If that happened or not, maybe that's a second argument. But what I'm saying is that was the concept of why we remind and remember the merits of Ali ibn Abi Talib and his blessed family. You know, many of our youth grow up here today in our society here, and they begin, for example, when they're growing up, they play sports, basketball or football or something of that nature. They start to dress like athletes. They start to wear what those athletes are wearing, on and off the court, on and off the field. You know, for example, they say, I'm sure you've all heard of Michael Jordan, very famous basketball player. They say that he started wearing his shorts in a way that everyone else, longer than everyone else. That started a trend, and everyone else in the league began to do that. And that cultural aspect began to flood over into the rest of the world. From America to China and everywhere in between, you will begin to see people who wear clothing in a similar manner. Even off the court, the types of clothing that they wear, it has a tremendous impact. The NBA, for example, and I use these examples to bring the point home. The NBA had a dress code implemented because before they felt the athletes were wearing clothing that was not representative of the association. Before that, the students, children in high school, middle school used to dress like that because the athletes used to dress like that. It has a tremendous impact on who you and I become. But if our heroes and our role models are not just people of this world, athletes and things of this nature, but rather are the Aimma, the Ahlebait alayhimus salam, you will notice the concept was to start embedding their traits in our lives. So if they had generosity in their lives, we work to be generous in our lives. If they have humility in their lives, we work to have humility in our lives. If they have the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we try to have taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our lives. This was the concept. But my dear brothers and sisters, I'm drawing to a conclusion. The whole concept was for us to get a strong connection to the Ahlul Bayt, to Ali ibn Abi Talib, to Imam Hussein alayhi salam, to Imam al-Hujjah alayhi salam, and understand the same way that Muqaddas Ardebili understood that there is an Imam of our time. There is a Ali ibn Abi Talib of our time who is in ghaiba that we must work towards developing a relationship with. This is where we are going in the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, the future of our community. We must work towards telling our youth, our children, excel in academics. Go to the best universities. Go to Harvard, go to Stanford, go to Princeton. But in the back of your mind, rather at the forefront of your mind, keep in mind how you can work towards the cause of the Imam. And each person will find a different answer. Someone will say, as Sayyid Sistani has said in his letter, contribute to our society. Are you not a part of this world? Are you not a part of the world that you've adopted as a home? You are. Therefore, contribute to research journals. Find cures to cancer. Find cures to illnesses. Solve technology problems, solve software problems, benefit humanity, benefit the world at large. But do this in light of the guidance of the Imam of our time. And you will notice in your life, you will get immense abundance and blessings in your life. You will find solutions to your problems that you never imagined. But that comes only through the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam and their divine guidance. I conclude. We're told
Imam Sahib al-Asr wa Zaman, he remembers Sayyid al-Shuhada time and time again, night after night. And I reminded you, and I'll remind you again, the Imam is attributed to have said that, "Oh, my grandfather Aba Abdullah," he says, "I cry for you, and I cry day and night for you. And when my tears, when they begin to go dry, I cry tears of blood for you." By the way, if you ever have a doubt, when in my youth, I lived a period of my time. I'm a first eyewitness to the narrator. That's why I'm sharing this with you. I was young, from Washington, D.C. We had moved to Dubai. I lived in Dubai for some time. When we went to Dubai, many of you may have visited there. There is an Imam Bargah by the name of Husayni al-Zahra. Our Arab brothers, they call Imam Bargah Husayniya. So it's Husayni al-Zahra. In Husayni al-Zahra, there was an alim who was the resident alim there, who lived there, and he was the wakil of Ayatollah Mohsin al-Hakim. He was the secretary of Ayatollah Mohsin al-Hakim, the one who I mentioned earlier, the patron of the al-Hakim family, Ayatollah Mohsin al-Hakim in the 70s. He says directly, he had become very old. He said, "I saw this with my own eyes, therefore I'm telling you." He said, "We were young students." His name was Sadiq Shah, by the way. In any event, he said, "We were young students who were in the proximity of Ayatollah Mohsin al-Hakim." This is the 70s, 60s, 70s, not very long ago, by the way. He says, "We asked Sayyid Mohsin al-Hakim a question." He said, "What was the question?" The question was, "We've heard that Imam Sahib al-Asr wa Zaman has said that when he cries for Sayyid al-Shuhada." The 12th Imam has said that when I cry for Sayyid al-Shuhada, my grandfather, I cry in a way that my tears become dry. And when my tears become dry, I begin to weep tears of blood for you. They said, "Sayyid Mohsin al-Hakim, how is this possible? Can you please tell us?" He says that Sayyid Mohsin al-Hakim told us, "Have a majlis here right now." He said, "Call someone to recite the Musibah of Aba Abdullah, call someone." And he said, "We're going to have a majlis here." He said, "Very well." He said, they called for the man to have a majlis, they called for the reciter. When he recited, he began to recite the Musibah of Aba Abdullah. When he began to recite the Musibah of Aba Abdullah, all the people in attendance who were there began to weep extensively. When they began to weep extensively, many of our scholars, they have a tradition. The tradition is when they weep for Sayyid al-Shuhada, Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam, they do it with a handkerchief, a rumal, for example. They put that over their eyes. And many scholars in their wasiyah, their will, they say, "Bury me with that handkerchief. Bury me with that rumal," for example. Ayatollah Najafi Marashi is one example. Ayatollah Alama Tabatabai is another example. Many scholars said, "Bury me with this." Ayatollah Mohsin al-Hakim also had a scarf or a handkerchief that he would cover his eyes with. When he did this, he was covering his eyes and he was weeping over the tragedy of Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam. Maulana Sayyid Sadiq Shah says that I saw after the musibah had ended, Ayatollah Mohsin al-Hakim called me close to him and his friend. He called them both close when people had left. He removed the handkerchief, he showed him blood right there and then. This is a marja who lived in the 70s, who passed away not very long ago. But we don't see these, so then we begin to doubt. That's why keep your connection to Karbala as strong as possible. Go to Karbala. If you can go once a year, go once a year. Go twice a year if you can go. Go as many times as you can, because that connection is vital. That connection to Ali Muhammad is vital. It is tremendously vital because it guides in the most difficult of circumstances. We have numerous traditions that say one should go at least, if nothing else, at least once every 4 years at a minimum. Consider it the price you pay of living here, maybe. It may change your life. This is the position of the gham and the sorrow of Sayyid al-Shuhada. We're told there's a moment in time where the Imam alayhi salam, he says, "Salam be unto my grandfather, whose lips had dried from the thirst. Salam on my grandfather, whose head was separated from his body." And then he says a line that destroys the heart. He says, Salam on my grandfather, on my Jad, whose teeth were broken with a rod. Allahu Akbar. They say on Sayyid al-Shuhada, when he put his sword into its sleeve and he covered his sword, when the verse came and Jibreel again recited the verse, Ya ayyatuha an-nafsul mutma'inna irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyya fadkhuli fi ibadi wadkhuli jannati. At that moment Imam Hussein alayhi salam put his sword away. But when Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he put his sword away, the enemy saw this. When the enemy saw that the Imam put his sword away, I can't tell you what happened afterwards. Historians from the other side, from Yazid's army, wrote, whoever had a sword threw a sword, whoever had a spear threw a spear, and whoever didn't have anything in their hand, they took a stone and they threw it towards Sayyid al-Shuhada. Ajrukum ala Allah, ajrukum ala Allah. The son of Fatima al-Zahra were swaying back and forth on the horse. Ajrukum ala Allah. I don't know, but my heart tells me that when he was swaying on the horse, maybe he remembered his brother Abu Fadl al-Abbas. Ajrukum ala Allah. They say that whenever the musibah of Ajrukum of Abu Fadl al-Abbas is recited, that Imam Sahib al-Zaman is present in that musibah. Ajrukum ala Allah. I'm leaving all of the musibah, I'm not reciting it. We're told, just one moment I will share with you. We are told, as you were hearing in the Marsiya, Sayyida Zainab, Bibi Zainab, she came back towards Medina. When she came back towards Medina, she began to recite some poetry, and she said, Madinatu jaddina la taqbalina, Madinatu jaddina la taqbalina. O Medina of our grandfather Rasulullah, do not accept us. Why? Because when we left, we had Qasim, we had Ali Akbar, we had Abu Fadl al-Abbas, we had Hussein. When we come back to you, we have no one. Ajrukum ala Allah. They say Sayyida Zainab, Bibi Zainab, she went to the grave of Rasulullah. She said, Ya Rasulallah, this is the shirt of your Hussein. She got up, she went towards the grave of her mother Fatima al-Zahra. She said, my mother Fatima al-Zahra, this is the shirt of your son Hussein. Ajrukum ala Allah. They say that Sayyida Zainab, she didn't go home after the tragedy of Karbala. They say that she went to the house of Imam Sajjad. Ajrukum ala Allah. The final moment I'm sharing with you, they say that Sayyida Zainab one day, she met right after the tragedy of Karbala, and when they came back to Medina, after 14 months, she met Ummul Baneen, the mother of Abu Fadl al-Abbas. When she met Ummul Baneen, they embraced each other, they hugged each other. Sayyida Zainab said, my mother Ummul Baneen. Of course, she was the stepmother of Sayyida Zainab, but she said, my mother Ummul Baneen, they killed my brother Abu Fadl al-Abbas. She began to cry. Ummul Baneen didn't. Ummul Baneen said, how did they kill my Hussein? Why Abu Fadl al-Abbas was there? While he was there, how did they kill Hussein? She began to weep. Sayyida Zainab said one thing, and that is what I want you to remember. Sayyida Zainab said, Ummul Baneen, my mother, do not blame Abu Fadl al-Abbas. She said, why? She says, Ummul Baneen, because Abu Fadl al-Abbas, when he was coming back towards the tents, they shot an arrow towards one of his arms. His arms fell toward the ground, one arm. Then they shot an arrow towards the other. His other arm fell towards the ground. When that happened, Ummul Baneen, do you know what happened? She said, what? Abbas had an arrow in his eyes. Ummul Baneen, when Abbas fell towards the ground, he didn't have any hands. When he fell towards the ground, the arrow that was on this side, it came out the other way. al-Banin, don't blame Abu Fadl al-Abbas. Sallallahu alayka ya Rasool Allah. Sallallahu alayka ya Amir al-Mu'minin. Sallallahu alayki ya Fatima al-Zahra Sayyidat al-Nisa al-Alamin. Sallallahu alayka ya Hasan al-Mujtaba. Assalamu ala al-Husayn وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. معتم حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين.
نام لے گا نام لے نام لے گا نام لے گا نام لے گا تجھے شبیر سا بھائی زینب نام لے گا تجھے شبیر سا بھائی زینب نام لے گا تجھے شبیر سا بھائی زینب نہ ملے گا تجھے شبیر سا بھائی زینب ڈھونڈنے جائے گی گر ساری خدائی زینب نہ ملے گا تجھے شبیر سا بھائی زینب نہ ملے گا تجھے شبیر سا بھائی زینب اپنے اشکوں سے جلا شام غریباں کے چراغ اپنے اشکوں سے جلا شام غریباں کے چراغ تو ہے چراغوں کی کائی زینب نہ ملے گا تجھے شبیر سا بھائی زینب نہ ملے گا تجھے شبیر سا بھائی زینب جانے کیا شام غریباں میں ستم ٹوٹے ہیں جانے کیا شام غریباں میں ستم ٹوٹے ہیں عمر بھر چین سے پھر سو نہیں پائی زینب نہ ملے گا تجھے شبیر سا بھائی زینب نہ ملے گا تجھے شبیر سا بھائی زینب دو پسر تو نے تو دو بازو دیے غازی نے دو پسر تو نے تو دو بازو دیے غازی نے پہلے تو رسم وفا تو نے نبھائی زینب نہ ملے گا تجھے شبیر سا بھائی زینب نہ ملے گا تجھے شبیر سا بھائی زینب پانی کو دیکھ کے کیوں کرنا جگر ٹکڑے ہو پانی کو دیکھ کے کیوں کرنا جگر ٹکڑے ہو بھاگ رہی ہے تیرے غازی کو ترائی زینب نہ ملے گا تجھے شبیر سا بھائی زینب نہ ملے گا تجھے شبیر سا بھائی زینب ہائے کس شان سے نکلی تھی وطن سے زینب ہائے کس شان سے نکلی تھی وطن سے زینب کیسی غربت کو سمیٹے ہوئے آئی زینب نہ ملے گا تجھے شبیر سا بھائی زینب نہ ملے گا تجھے شبیر سا بھائی زینب نہ ملے گا تجھے شبیر سا بھائی زینب یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین
یہ بولی بیٹی بصرت سلام لو اماں سنو ہماری مصیبت سلام لو اماں سنو ہماری مصیبت سلام لو اماں سنو ہماری مصیبت سلام لو اماں بلا کے گھر سے ہمیں اشکیا نے لوٹا ہے حسین بھائی میرا کربلا میں چھوٹا ہے پہاڑ درد و مصیبت کا ہم پر ٹوٹا ہے پہاڑ درد و مصیبت کا ہم پہ ٹوٹا ہے ہوئی یہ کیسی ضیافت سلام لو اماں سنو ہماری مصیبت سلام لو اماں سنو ہماری مصیبت سلام لو اماں شام کوفہ کی حالت تمہیں سناؤں کیا جو اہل بیت پبی تھی وہ اب بتاؤں کیا حسن کے نیل ہے بازو میں دکھاؤں کیا حسن کے نیل ہے بازو میں دکھاؤں کیا خود ٹک دیکھ لو حالت سلام لو اماں سنو ہماری مصیبت سلام لو اماں سنو ہماری مصیبت سلام لو عجیب ظلم کیا نہیں چلی زمانے میں کلیجہ پھٹتا ہے رودا کہ ہم سنانے میں سکینہ مر گئی گھٹ گھٹ کے قید خانے میں سکینہ مر گئی گھٹ گھٹ کے قید خانے میں بنا کے آئی ہوں تربت سلام لو اماں سنو ہمارا मुसीबत सलाम लो अम्मा सुनो हमारी मुसीबत सलाम लो अम्मा वो आबिदे बीमार था वो आबिदे बीमार था चलने से जो लाचार था चलने से जो लाचार था और शाम का बाजार था और शाम का बाजार था थी मुस्तफा की बेटियां मौला हक इमाम या हसन या हुसैन मौला हक इमाम या हसन या हुसैन या हुसैन अल्लाहुम्मा सल्ली अला मुहम्मद
السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي هلت بفنائك عليك مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت بقي الليل والنهار ولا جعل الله أخلد مني لزيارتكم السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين والذين بذلوا مهجهم دون الحسين السلام عليك يا قمر بني هاشم يا أبا الفضل العباس ابن أمير المؤمنين السلام عليكم جميع الشهداء بكربلاء ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليك علي بن موسى الرضا راضي بالقدر والقضاء روحي وجسم لك الفضاء ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليك يا مولانا يا صاحب العصر والزمان السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن السلام عليك إمام وإمام الإنس والجان السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن الأمان 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 من فتنة الزمان هذا أجل الله تعالى فرجك وسأل الله تعالى مخرجك وظهورك السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته